I've always believed that families, like gardens, grow best with a bit of patience and a whole lot of love. My name is Clara, and I live on a quiet street in Maple Hollow, a suburb where the mailman knows your dog's name and neighbours lend sugar without measuring it out. It's the kind of place where porches are for storytelling and fences are more symbolic than practical. My husband, Daniel, and I have lived here for over a decade. Our home is modest but full of laughter, mismatched mugs, and hand-painted drawings from our two kids, Ellie and Max. Life in our little corner of the world isn't perfect, but it's warm, lived in, and honest. Most afternoons are spent juggling homework, soccer practice, and impromptu dance parties in the kitchen while dinner simmers on the stove. Daniel's family, on the other hand, carries an air of polished formality. His sister, Elise, is the queen bee of perfection. She hosts weekly family dinners that feel more like museum exhibitions than meals. White linen napkins, classical music playing softly in the background, wine glasses lined up like soldiers. Everyone shows up in their Sunday best, with polite smiles and restrained laughter. It's beautiful, no doubt, but it's never felt like me. That's where the trouble began, I suppose. Or maybe it was always there, unspoken, quietly growing like a weed in freshly laid mulch. At first, I chalked up the missing invitations to forgetfulness or miscommunication. It must have slipped Elise's mind, I told Daniel when we missed one dinner. She probably thought we were busy, I reasoned after the next. But when the invitations stopped coming altogether, when Elise began to post pictures of the dinners online, with everyone gathered around her long table except us, I could no longer hide behind excuses. The ache that followed surprised me. I didn't think I'd care so much, but it stung more than I expected. Not because I craved her fancy food or candlelight ambiance, but because being excluded from something labelled family made me feel like I didn't quite belong. And belonging, for someone who's built a life centred on it, matters. Daniel tried to smooth things over. She probably doesn't even realise, he said, avoiding the confrontation like it was a pothole on a familiar road. It's not personal, but it felt personal. Every skipped dinner felt like a little erasure, a quiet way of saying I wasn't part of the picture she wanted to paint. Still, I didn't make a scene. I smiled at Elise when we crossed paths at birthday parties or holidays, helped wash dishes after Thanksgiving, complimented her decor. I played my part. But in the quiet corners of my heart, the roots of something else began to grow. And that's where my garden comes in. It's a strange kind of loneliness, being left out by someone who still smiles at you in public. Elise never said a harsh word to me. She didn't need to. Her silence, her omission, did all the talking. The family dinners continued every Sunday, like clockwork. Photos would pop up on social media, her long, glimmering table set with tapered candles and seasonal centerpieces, her kids dressed in matching outfits, and Daniel's parents sitting at the head of the table like royalty. My absence wasn't glaring to anyone else, but to me, it was a loud, echoing absence, a confirmation that I didn't quite fit the family mould. At first, I'd pretend I didn't care. I'd pour myself a glass of wine, throw on a cosy sweater, and make something comforting for dinner: spaghetti, tacos, grilled cheese with tomato soup. The kids would help set the table in their messy way, forks where the knives should be, napkins folded into wild origami. Daniel, ever the peacekeeper, stayed neutral. He'd help cook, help clean, but never bring up his sister. And I stopped asking. Still, that lingering feeling clung to me, like something was fundamentally wrong with me, something Elise could see that others couldn't. Why else would she carve me out of the ritual while embracing everyone else? The worst part was the subtle nature of it. She didn't slam a door, she simply never opened it. When confronted, people like Elise always have a way out. "Oh, It was just a small thing, or I thought you were busy. But busy people still get invited. I knew that. Our Sunday evenings became a stark contrast to hers, our laughter louder, our table stickier, our meals less refined. But they were ours. We played board games and danced barefoot in the living room. We used paper napkins and clinked mismatched glasses filled with lemonade. It was chaotic and imperfect and full of life. But even in the joy, there was a quiet yearning. Not for the grandeur of Elise's dinners, but for the sense of unity they represented. Family, as she defined it, was something curated and exclusive. And I wanted to belong, not to the performance, but to the people. The exclusion began to chip away at my confidence. I found myself second-guessing my words around her, wondering if I was too loud, too casual, too me. Well, I felt like a guest in my own marriage's extended family, a permanent outsider. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes while Daniel dried. I finally spoke the words I'd been holding in. "Does Elise not like me?" He froze for a second, then shrugged in that helpless way he always did when things got uncomfortable. "I don't think it's that simple." "But she never invites us," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "It feels pretty simple." He didn't have an answer. And maybe there wasn't one. Maybe Elise didn't think about me at all. Maybe she did and didn't care. Either way, the result was the same. So I stopped looking at the pictures. I stopped waiting for the call or the text that never came. I stopped pretending that it didn't hurt. And instead, I turned to something that would never judge me, never exclude me, never ask me to be anything other than who I was. I turned to my garden. It started with one pot of basil on the windowsill. I'd bought it on a whim at the farmer's market, a little green promise in a terracotta pot. I didn't expect it to thrive, but it did, soft, fragrant, and alive under my care. There was something deeply satisfying about watching it grow. Maybe it was the control or the quiet affirmation that I could nurture something from seed to full bloom. After that, I cleared out the patch of weedy soil beside the garage. It wasn't much, just a strip of neglected earth littered with old bricks and dry leaves. But I dug into it with a kind of urgency, turning the soil like I was unearthing something inside myself. I planted cherry tomatoes, lavender, marigolds, anything that caught my eye at the nursery. I didn't follow a plan. I just planted what made me feel something. And slowly, something beautiful began to take shape. The kids got involved too. Ellie painted signs with the names of the plants, misspelled and crooked but charming. Max took it upon himself to chase away squirrels, armed with a toy sword and a very serious expression. Daniel, though hesitant at first, built me a little bench out of reclaimed wood, setting it under the shade of the oak tree. Neighbours started to notice. One morning, Mrs. Halverson from across the street came over with a cutting from her hydrangeas. "They're fussy, but lovely," she said. "Like me." We laughed, and I planted them near the edge, where they caught the morning sun. Then came Rob, the retired firefighter next door, who offered me his old wheelbarrow and stories about his mother's rose garden. Later, the teenage twins down the block brought over painted rocks to decorate the border. A few weeks in, I looked around and realised this wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a gathering place, a little corner of the world where people came to breathe and talk and belong. The garden didn't care if you wore pearls or flip-flops. It didn't require RSVP cards or folded napkins. It asked only that you show up with your hands open and your heart ready. In its blooming wildness, I found something that Elise's manicured dinner parties never gave me. Freedom. Freedom to be messy. To be honest. To be real. Here, I wasn't overlooked. I wasn't edited out. I was rooted. and in tending it, I began to tend to myself. I started waking early just to walk barefoot on the dewy grass, coffee in hand, watching the light spill over the petals like gold. I'd journal at the little bench, listening to the soft hum of bees and the chatter of birds. There were days when I cried into the soil, and it absorbed every tear without judgment. I didn't set out to create a sanctuary. I just needed something to care for, something that grew with me. But it became more than that. It became a quiet declaration. I am still here. I still matter. I still belong. And perhaps, most unexpectedly, it became the bridge I never thought would exist. Because one Sunday afternoon, as the scent of jasmine filled the air and laughter from my kids echoed down the street, I looked up, and there she was. Elise, standing at the garden gate, holding something in her hands. At first, I wasn't sure it was really her. Elise never came unannounced. She was the type to text a week in advance, follow up the day before, and arrive precisely on time with perfect lipstick and not a hair out of place. Yet there she was, standing just outside the garden gate in her beige trench coat, clutching a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. We stared at each other for a moment, both frozen like we weren't sure how to start. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of thyme and honeysuckle between us. "Hi, Clara," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "Elise," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. I brushed dirt off my hands onto the legs of my jeans and stepped toward the gate, heart beating faster than I'd expected. She began, then stopped. She looked down at the box in her hands. "I brought something for you. It's from my garden. Just a few things I thought you might like." That surprised me. Elisu had a garden. I opened the gate slowly and motioned for her to come in. She hesitated, then stepped inside like someone entering sacred ground. Her heels sank a little into the soft soil, and she winced. I took the box from her hands, peeling back the paper. Inside were bundles of dried lavender, a jar of homemade rosehip jam, and a small envelope of seeds labelled Heirloom Snapdragons. Her handwriting was neat, almost shy. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I couldn't. "I didn't know you had a garden," I said finally. She gave a half smile. "I don't. Not really, just a few things on the balcony. But I've been watching yours grow. It's beautiful, alive. It made me realise something." I looked up. She wasn't wearing her usual armour of perfection. No makeup, a strand of hair slipping out of her bun. Her eyes, blue like Daniel's, were softer than I'd ever seen them. "I'm sorry," she said, "for excluding you, for making you feel like you didn't belong. It wasn't fair, I think. I got so wrapped up in how I thought things should be that I didn't make room for anything or anyone different." The words hung in the air between us, delicate and surprising. "I thought you didn't like me," I admitted. "I didn't know you," she said, "and I didn't try to." There was a long silence, the kind that doesn't feel awkward, just heavy with the things finally being said. I gestured to the bench beneath the oak tree, and we sat side by side. The breeze tugged gently at the lavender in my lap. "You know," I said, "this garden, it started out as a way to deal with the silence. Your silence, but it's become more than that. It's a part of me now." "I can see that," she said, "and I'd like to be a part of it too, if you'll let me." I looked around at the blooms, at the signs Ellie had painted, at Max's rubber sword leaning against the fence. Then I looked at Elise, not the polished hostess, but the woman sitting next to me, finally letting herself be vulnerable. "Okay," I said, "let's grow something new." And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. It felt like a beginning. It began quietly, almost without intention. The following Sunday, Elise came back. This time she brought her kids, Mila and Jonah, along with a basket of fresh bread and a hesitant smile. Daniel raised an eyebrow when he saw her at the gate, but I just nodded, my hands deep in a bowl of potato salad. We set up a table under the oak tree. Nothing fancy, just a folding table draped with a cotton tablecloth patterned in sunflowers. The kids ran barefoot through the grass, and Elise surprised me by laughing, really laughing, when Max handed her a dandelion bouquet and told her she was like a flower queen now. It was awkward at first. Elise didn't quite know where to sit or what to say, but little by little, she eased into the rhythm of our chaos. She helped Ellie with the lemonade pitcher and even let Jonah smear ketchup all over his shirt without rushing to clean it. By the time the sun dipped below the rooftops and we lit citronella candles, something had shifted. She came the next week too, and the week after that. What had once been a closed-door dinner behind white curtains turned into a weekly garden gathering open to anyone who wanted to come. The format was simple. Everyone brought a dish, shoes were optional, and the only rule was no judgment. We spread out picnic blankets when the table filled up and used mismatched chairs that neighbours offered up when they heard what we were doing. Mrs. Halverson started showing up with lemon bars. Rob brought his homemade pickles. Even the teenage twins helped string fairy lights across the fence one Saturday morning, laughing about how this place was cooler than TikTok now. And Elise? She found her place among us. She began showing up early to help set up. She'd roll up her sleeves, dig into the soil with me, and ask questions about composting and companion planting. She still wore pearls sometimes, but now they swung above a t-shirt stained with tomato juice and laughter. She let go of perfection and leaned into presence. One Sunday, she brought her famous quiche. We all teased her for the perfectly folded napkins she insisted on placing beside the plates, but no one complained when the first bite melted in their mouths. That same evening, she sat beside me on the bench and said, "I never knew life could be this full without being so curated." I smiled and handed her a trowel. Turns out, messy can be magic. And that's what it became. A little pocket of magic every week. A place where laughter floated up with the scent of rosemary and grilled corn, where kids dragged each other through the sprinkler and adults swapped stories while pulling weeds. The garden didn't just grow plants anymore, it grew people. It grew connection. And it grew a new tradition, one rooted in acceptance, generosity, and second chances. Somehow, without ever planning it, Elise and I had blended our worlds, not by changing who we were, but by choosing to see each other fully. And as I watched our families clink lemonade glasses under strings of twinkling lights, I knew something true. This was family. Not the kind you pose for in portraits, but the kind that blooms wild and real in the open air. There's something profound about watching things grow, plants, relationships, even wounds as they begin to heal. My garden taught me that. Or maybe it reminded me of what I'd always known but had somehow forgotten in the busyness of life, that growth takes time, and so does grace. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much changed from that first pot of basil to this wide, blooming haven behind our home. What started as a place of refuge became a place of connection. What began with silence ended in laughter. And somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like I had to prove I belonged. I think that was the real shift, not Elise's apology, not the Sunday dinners, but the way I started to believe in my own worth again. I stopped measuring myself by someone else's standards and started leaning into the beauty of what I had just as it was. Imperfect, messy, alive. Elise and I still have our differences. She'll probably never stop folding napkins into perfect triangles, and I'll never stop using mason jars for everything from iced tea to wildflowers. But now, we meet in the middle, on picnic benches, in garden rows, in the soft language of second chances. Daniel told me once that he was proud of how I handled everything, that he admired the way I chose creation over confrontation. I didn't have a response then, but now I think I do. I just kept planting, I told him one evening, as we watched the kids chase fireflies. And eventually, something bloomed. Forgiveness didn't come in one big moment. It came in small gestures, a shared laugh, a helping hand, an honest conversation, and understanding. That came too, not in dramatic revelations, but in the quiet realization that everyone's carrying something invisible. Elise wasn't the villain I'd built in my head. She was just someone trying to hold it all together in her own rigid way, and I was someone who needed to feel seen. The garden gave us a common ground, literally and figuratively. In its soil, we planted new traditions. In its shade, we found comfort. And in its light, we learned to soften toward each other. The community that formed around it was the most unexpected gift of all. People I'd barely known became friends, friends became family, and our Sundays became sacred, not because of what we served, but because of who showed up. I learned that family isn't defined by formal invitations or spotless tablecloths. It's defined by presence, by effort, by love that shows up even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. It's the kind that grows roots, deep ones, and keeps showing up season after season. And in that truth, I found peace. We're all just gardens, really. A little wild, a little weathered, constantly growing. We bloom best when we're nurtured with patience and kindness. And sometimes, all it takes is opening the gate. The garden looks different now. Fuller, wilder, more alive than I ever dreamed when I first dug my hands into the soil that spring. The cherry tomatoes still climb the trellis, but now they're joined by sunflowers tall enough to shade a hammock, by herbs I didn't even know how to pronounce a year ago, and by a winding path of smooth stones painted by tiny neighbourhood hands. There's a wooden sign near the gate now, one Daniel carved for me last Mother's Day. It says, "The Gathering Garden." Underneath, in smaller letters, all are welcome. We never really planned for it to become a community space, but that's exactly what it became. People show up with folding chairs and fruit salad. Kids run barefoot through the grass with popsicles. Sometimes someone brings a guitar and we sing under the string lights. Other times it's quiet, just neighbours with tea, swapping stories or sitting in shared silence. And Elise? She's still part of it too. We laugh sometimes at how far we've come, at how the garden brought us together when nothing else could. She helps me plan now, what to plant next season, when to host the next dinner, who might need an extra plate delivered to their porch. Last week, she showed up early with 2 potted roses. "One for you," she said, "and one for me, to remind us where this all started." I think about that a lot, the power of small things. A seed, a smile, a second chance. None of it seemed big at the time, but looking back, each one made room for something to grow. The kids have grown too. Max is taller now, his sword replaced with a bug-catching jar. Ellie wants to plant her own row of wildflowers this year and name each one after a different emotion. So we don't forget what feelings look like when they grow, she said. She's always had a poet's heart. Sometimes I sit on the bench under the oak tree alone, just watching the garden move with the breeze. I think about the versions of myself who stood here before, the hurt one, the angry one, the hopeful one, and I silently thank them. They kept going. They didn't give up. And I think of others too, the ones still on the outside of something, the ones waiting for an apology, a gesture, a place to belong. I hope they find their own garden, whatever shape it takes, because here's what I know now. Belonging doesn't always come through the front door. Sometimes it waits for you in the quiet, asking you to build it yourself. And when you do, when you pour love and time and forgiveness into something, it grows. Not perfectly, but beautifully. This garden saved a part of me. It gave me a place to root, and then it gave me wings. And so it keeps growing. Through seasons, through setbacks, through storms and sunshine alike. It keeps reminding me that healing isn't a destination. It's a process. One that blooms in its own time, in its own way. And every Sunday, as laughter rings through the leaves and someone passes a bowl of strawberries down the table, I smile. Because this is home.